Chapter 198. Snow Without Trace. With a hint of doubt and a hint of curiosity, Kang Qian walked into the Lijuan Hall. The law enforcement disciples he encountered along the way didn't recognize him. Some of them just gave him a slightly curious glance. After all, there were very few Jidan stage cultivators on top of the dark gold peak. Once he entered the Lijuan Hall, it could be described as a sea of people. As far as the eye could see, there were tens of thousands of people. Ha ha ha. This time I tested. At the Yuaning stage, I reached 7 times, not far from being sealed as a king. A few law enforcement disciples walked head-on. One of them, a big man in green, said with a smile full of complacency. The others looked at him with envious faces. Here, what do you count as our dark gold peak's genius? Zhu Wuyin has already reached 30 times in the Yuaning stage. That's truly awesome, being sealed as invincible. A youth next to him sniffed sarcastically. The green-clothed big man's old face reddened, and he hurriedly said, Zhu Wuyin is our dark gold peak's strongest genius after the 3 disciples of the law enforcement elder. I naturally can't be compared to him, but it's a pity that even if he's powerful, he's still not being looked at by the law enforcement elder. Hee. Speaking of this, I remembered something. I heard that Zhu Wuyin was very dissatisfied with the new disciple, named Kang Qian, that the law enforcement elder had taken in. He threatened that amongst the same level, that Kang Qian was simply inferior to him. A law enforcement disciple whispered, Ha, I'm really looking forward to those 2 meeting. I wonder just how talented that Kang Qian is. Kang Qian made his way into the main hall, hearing the words coming from all around him, mostly about the genius of a Zhu Wuyin. How many times? How many times already? Testing what? Kang Qian was extremely curious as he made his way through the crowd and walked deeper into the Great Hall, where a huge greyish-white boulder sat and stood, emitting a mysterious aura. This stone was not simple. This was Kang Qian's first feeling. Jean squeezed through the crowd and walked towards the grey and white boulder. On the stone monument, next to the grey-white boulder, the 3 golden words Powers-One stone were engraved, shining brightly. The Lijuan Hall was very wide, and the only attraction inside was a huge grey and white stone. The surface of this stone was as smooth as a mirror, emitting a faint light, which appeared to be very strange. The stone tablet next to the grey-white boulder had inscriptions that indicated the identity of the boulder, which was the Forged-One stone. Kang Qian had long since heard about the mysteries of the Forged-One stone from his 3rd senior brother, so his heart was very curious as he squeezed through the crowd and watched from the side. There were many law enforcement disciples around, and each of them were murmuring and watching every law enforcement disciple who approached the Forged-One stone with an expectant gaze. At this moment, a man in green clothes approached the Forged-One stone. This is Wang Qi. I heard that he was already sealed as a king 30 years ago at the Yuaning stage. I wonder what level he can reach this time. Next to Kang Qian, a black-robed law enforcement disciple said to his friend beside him. In front of the Forged-One stone, the law enforcement disciple and Wang Qi's entire body emitted an incomparably blinding light as he gathered his entire body's strength and suddenly fiercely blasted his fist at the Forged-One stone in front of him. Powerful, very powerful. Kang Qian's heart was shaken. This Wang Qi was very powerful, definitely not that ordinary Yuaning stage powerhouse. In his impression, even Zhenin King and Fendu Old City Lord were not this person's opponent. At this moment, everyone was looking at the Forged-One stone with anticipation. After this huge greyish-white stone was blasted by Wang Qi's punch, it erupted with an even more blinding light. Everyone couldn't help but close their eyes, and only a small number of people with strong strength could still see clearly. Kang Qian also closed his eyes, unable to stand the blinding light. Swish, after all the light disappeared, a light suddenly flashed on top of the Powers-One stone, and in the next moment, a large 17 appeared on the smooth, mirror-like surface and was seen by everyone. Without waiting for Kang Qian to understand what was going on, he already found the crowd around him exclaiming in shock. 17. Surprisingly 17 times. This Wuxia must have had some kind of strange encounter. Otherwise, how could his strength increase so fast? He's almost close to the Emperor level. Rumor has it that Wuxia obtained a treasure in the Heavenly Tao's secret realm that refined his fleshly body to be very powerful. It seems to be true. The Heavenly Tao's secret realm opens once every 30 years. Next time I'll also go in to break in and see if I'm so lucky to get a treasure. Shocked cries came out from amongst the surrounding crowd. Many people's eyes were filled with shock, surprise, envy, and jealousy. While Wuxia, who was being watched by the crowd, smiled very proudly before proudly leaving the Forged Chuan Hall. Kang Qian was listening to the side and did not understand what this Forged Chuan stone was for. He could not help but ask a nearby law enforcement disciple, "This big brother, what exactly is the purpose of this Forged Chuan stone? Why is it that, when that senior blasts a punch, the Forged Chuan stone displays numbers on it?" Beside Kang Qian was an early Yuanying stage enforcement disciple who had also just been promoted to the Yuanying stage not long ago. So he didn't dare to underestimate Kang Qian, a little guy at the peak of the 9th level of the Jidan stage. What's more, his intuition told him that this purple-robed little guy in front of him was not simple. "You don't know, you wouldn't have just joined our law enforcement lineage, right? Hahe. To tell you the truth, this Forged Chuan stone can be marvelous." This law enforcement disciple first glanced at Kang Qian in astonishment before explaining the Forged Chuan stone's subtleties to Kang Qian. Kang Qian was astonished after listening. This Forged Chuan stone's origin was very uncomplicated, rumored to be left behind by an unknown number of generations of the Heavenly Tao sect's grandmasters, and it was said to be specialized in testing the strength of the body refining lineage cultivators. The testing principle of this Forged Chuan stone was even more surprising to Kang Qian. It was said that the Forged Chuan stone could sense the cultivation realm of every cultivator who attacked it and automatically float corresponding numbers on the surface. The strength displayed by these numbers was the number of times the cultivator had exceeded the peak of his realm. To put it simply, if a cultivator at the peak of the 9th level of the Jidan stage attacked the Lixuan stone with all his strength, the number displayed on the surface of the Lixuan would be 1. And similarly for cultivators at the peak of the 9th level of the Yuanying stage and the exit vessel stage. The same was true for the Yuanying stage and the 9th level of the outbreathing stage. Whenever an attack was made at the peak level of each realm, the number displayed on the Lixuan stone would be 1. If it was below the peak level, then the number displayed would be 0. If a cultivator possessed a powerful talent, and although he was still at the peak of the 9th level of the Jidan stage, his strength exceeded that of an ordinary cultivator at the peak of the 9th level of the Jidan stage by 10 times, then the Forged Chuan stone would display a number of 10. According to the divisions of King, Emperor, and Invincible above the peak, a cultivator who could reach 10 times the strength of the Forged Chuan stone would be a king in the same level. 20 times is an emperor, and 30 times is invincible. According to Kang Qian's strength after breaking through the 7th floor of the demon locking tower, if he were to test it, the number displayed above the Forged Chuan stone would definitely be above 30 times. Just now, that law enforcement disciple named Wuxia was displaying 17 times, indicating that at the Yuanying stage, he had already reached the peak of the king level, and was close to being an emperor level Yuanying stage powerhouse. After figuring out the subtleties of the Forged Chuan stone, Kang Qian finally understood why third senior brother had asked him to come to the Forged Chuan Hall to have a look when he had the time. This place could actually accurately test one's strength. No wonder it would attract so many people to gather here. To know, every cultivator would want to know their exact strength. which would make them more motivated to cultivate. Just like that, Wuxia knew that his current strength was 17 times. Then when he went back, he would cultivate even harder, striving to reach 18 times or even higher the next time. In this way, it naturally attracted many law enforcement disciples to come and test. Of course, one couldn't rule out the fact that some people were purely here to see the fun. Kang Qian was also somewhat moved. He also wanted to see what his current strength was at the Jidan stage. Although third senior brother said that he was invincible at the Jidan stage, it was only an approximation and not an accurate strength. He was curious as to how many times he could reach. Even the Dan Emperor, who was refining the Dragon Blood Pill, a reverse heavenly cauldron, was also caught by the subtlety of the Force Zhuan Stone. He smiled and said, "I've long heard about the subtlety of the Force Zhuan Stone of the law enforcement lineage of the Heavenly Dao sect, that it can test the exact strength of a cultivator under the parting of the spirit stage. It's really a reputation that lives up to its name. Kid, you try it too." In fact, there was a limit to how much this Force Zhuan Stone could withstand. Above the divine separation stage, it would not be able to be tested here, or else the Force Zhuan Stone would have to be blown up. Kang Qian was already a little bit intrigued, and when Dan Huang said so, he went to the side and queued up. There were many law enforcement disciples who came to the Force Zhuan Hall to test, thousands of them, so they needed to queue up. In addition, there were several thousand people watching from the side. Kang Qian came late, so he needed to wait for a long time, and a full week had passed, but it wasn't his turn. However, Kang Qian wasn't in a hurry. In the cultivation realm, cultivators didn't count time in days at all. This was because when some cultivators cultivated just once, months or even days would pass. Therefore, many of the law enforcement disciples of the Liege One Hall waited patiently. Even those law enforcement disciples who watched the spectacle were not in a hurry to leave. They wanted to see the geniuses that came out of the dark gold peak. Time passed quickly, and after another week, there were only a few dozen people left in the queue in front of Kang Qian. On this day, Kang Qian was watching an outbreathing stage powerhouse test when suddenly a clamor came from outside the Liege One Hall. Soon, he heard exclamations of surprise coming from the crowd around him, everyone staring wide-eyed towards the outside of the Force Zhuan Hall, if they were looking at someone. Kang Qian became curious, and he also followed the crowd's gaze. Outside the Liege One Hall, a young man dressed in white like snow walked in with a haughty face, and the law enforcement disciples that he encountered along the way all stepped aside, not daring to block this white-clothed young man's path. Kang Qian was very surprised. According to the information transmitted by the Dan Emperor, this white-clothed youth's knowledge is only at the Yuanying stage. Even if it is the peak of the Yuanying stage, it is not worth the attention of so many people. After all, in the middle of this Lixuan Hall, there are many out-of-body stage powerhouses, and even the peak of the out-of-body stage powerhouses are quite a few. Could it be that this white-clothed youth has an extraordinary identity? A trace of doubt surfaced in Kang Qian's heart, but he immediately knew why. As the surrounding crowd was talking about this white-clothed youth who had suddenly arrived, from the information transmitted by the law enforcement disciple beside him, Kang Qian learnt that this white-clothed youth was called Zhu Wuin and was the most highly regarded peerless genius above the dark gold peak, apart from his three senior brothers. It was said that Zhu Wuin was only over 100 years old, but his cultivation had already reached the peak of the Yuanying stage. And the last time he came to the Lixuan temple to take the test, the number displayed was 30. This meant that Zhu Wuin had already been sealed as invincible at the Yuanying stage. To have reached invincibility at the Yuanying stage at such a young age, one could imagine how conspicuous he was above the dark gold peak. It was even rumored that if the elder of law enforcement hadn't announced long ago that he would only accept 3 disciples in his lifetime, then this Zhu Wuin would have definitely been favored by the Elder of Law Enforcement. However, even if he didn't become a disciple of the Elder of Law Enforcement, this Zhu Wuin's status above Dark Gold Peak was still very high. And although the Elder of Law Enforcement didn't accept him as a disciple, he had found a body refining technique second only to the 9 revolutions of the Zhuanggong and passed it on to him, allowing his cultivation to be greatly improved. Above Dark Gold Peak, many people thought that he was the law enforcement elder's named disciple. Even if the law enforcement elder had acquiesced, Zhu Wuin, didn't you come to test once 10 years ago? What? Did you have another breakthrough? An elderly, who sat in the Power Zhuan Hall, greeted Zhu Wuin with a smile on his face